Good afternoon, Chairman. We are now live on Castus and YouTube. You can take the floor.
Thank you, Ryan. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Pitt County Planning Board meeting for the month of June 2021. And I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. And if Ms. Otten, if you would call the roll, please.
Fred Austin.
Present.
Faye Barefoot.
Present.
Naomi Buck.
Present.
Brad Goose.
Present.
RJ Hemby.
Present.
John Landron.
Here.
Steve Little.
Present.
Tucker Moore.
Hello. Here.
And Mr. Chairman, David Davenport and Maria Rochester did notify the office that they would not be participating tonight. And Don
Okay.
Brown may be joining us, but will be late.
All right. Thank you very much. Thanks everybody for being here this evening. If you'll join me in a silent prayer. Thank you. Now, you'll join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Hope everybody's received a copy of the minutes. If not, please speak up. And if you have any questions or corrections, please let me know. If not, I will entertain a motion to approve those.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Little has made the motion, and I believe that's Ms. Barefoot
Right.
that seconded. So Ms. Otten, if we could have a roll call vote to approve the minutes.
Fred Austin.
Approved.
Faye Barefoot.
Approved.
Naomi Buck. Naomi Buck. Brad Goose.
Approve.
RJ Hemby.
Approved.
John Landron.
Approved.
Steve Little.
Approved.
Tucker Moore.
Approved.
Miss Naomi Buck. I believe she's on mute.
Ms. Buck may be on mute. I believe we have approval of our minutes. Thank you very much. So our next item is public addresses to the board. This board obviously gives opportunity for folks to address us. I don't believe anybody has signed up this evening to do that at this point. Is that correct, Ms. Otten?
Yes, sir.
All right, so we'll move next to our item number 5, which is our development review. And I believe Mr. Bryant is going to present our Harris Ridge Phase 4 plan for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First up for development review, we have Harris Ridge Phase 4 preliminary plan. This is located on Harris Ridge Road, west of its intersection with Stanley Road and the Aden Township, zoned agricultural. It's zoned rural agricultural, 17 lots, 34.4 acres. The owner is 4V Corporation. This is an overall aerial of the site here near NC 102. This is a closer view. You can see it's an extension of Harris Ridge Road. This is an overall view of the plan. Harris Ridge Road will be proposed private. This will be extension from the public. The landscape buffer will extend along NC 102. And their open space is located along the access easement there of lot 44. This site is zoned RA, minimum 30,000 square foot lot size. One new street is proposed, Harris Ridge Road private. Electricity by GUC. Water service by Eastern Pines Water. The conditions and requirements on this plan. Pitt County Planning, Harris Ridge Road and Harris Ridge Section 2 is shown as private and has already been dedicated as public. Correct this designation on the plat for the street, and that's directed at the first half of the street that is currently existing. An erosion control plan will be required for this project that includes any areas where a drain tile will be removed. No stormwater BMPs are required. If any amendments are made to the approved plan, revised stormwater calculations must be submitted to the Pitt County Planning Department. Pitt County Environmental Health, septic systems must be approved prior to final plat approval, and no applications have been received on this project at this time. Greenville Utilities, a 10-foot electric easement will be required to wrap around the soil path across lot 45. Eastern Pines Water will be able to supply water to the proposed subdivision. North Carolina Department of Transportation requests the statement, this plat does not conform to NC GS 136-102.6. And I will note here that our ordinance does require that the streets be built to DOT approval. So they will still be built to the same standards. This is a view of the site from Harris Ridge Road. This is looking back the other direction towards Stanley Road. This is a view facing NC 102 from Harris Ridge Road. You can also see the adjacent properties across 102.
We are unable to take your call.
This is a view from NC 102. And you can see just where the street ends there and where proposed subdivision will connect. And this is also looking across NC 102 at the adjacent properties that are directly across the street. The Technical Review Committee has recommended conditional approval. Adjacent property owners have been notified and staff has not received any inquiries in regards to the proposed subdivision. At this time, do we have any questions from the board?
Thank you, Mr. Bryant. Does anybody have any questions for Jason?
None here.
All right, hearing none, do I hear a motion to approve or deny this preliminary plan?
I move we grant conditional approval.
Mr. Little has motion to approve conditional approval. Is there a second?
I second it.
And that's Ms. Barefoot, I believe. Ms. Otten, if you would do a roll call vote for plat approval, please.
Fred Austin,
Approved.
Faye Barefoot,
Approved.
Naomi Buck, Brad Guth,
Approve.
RJ Hamby,
Approved.
John Landron,
Approved.
Steve Little,
Approved.
Tucker Moore,
Approved.
Miss Naomi Buck.
What's happening?
Miss Naomi Buck.
Still on mute.
Mr. Chairman, that's everyone except Miss Naomi.
Okay, thank you. We'll move to the next item on our agenda, which is administrative matters. And I believe Mr. Jordan Smith is going to address the decision guide in your packets for zoning and subdivision decisions, and then a summary of the conflict of interest standards. Mr. Smith?
Yes, good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board.
So I hope you'll get your meal and eat until we get this done.
Here to speak to you tonight, I have materials in your agenda. I think pages 17 through 19 come from me. 17 is just really a cover sheet explaining two handouts. I spoke to the board in May, I believe it was, about the differences between your subdivision review and zoning matters. And I believe Mr. Hemby asked for some type of chart or decision tree. And this is what I came up for with you, is on page 18. It's simply a chart summarizing the two differences between the two processes. I won't belabor that unless there's any questions. And I will say it was made in color, and when printing out materials for the board, it's in black and white. If any members would like a color copy, please, it was a little bit easier on the eyes, in my opinion, the color copy. But anyways, if you'd like a color copy, please reach out to me or James or Tab. Happy to email you the color version. Unless there's any questions about that chart, I'm going to move on to the next issue.
Can't hear you.
Covered this in May, but the other page in your materials, page 19, is somewhat new. So, Jason, could you go to the next slide, please? Is everybody getting a lot of feedback?
Ryan, are you still on with us?
Okay.
I think he eliminated the feedback.
Sorry, I was having trouble.
We were too.
Okay. So just to go back, I don't know if there's any questions about the chart summarizing the difference between subdivisions and zoning. I guess just as a quick summary, I would just like to remind the board, in zoning decisions, the board is more or less free to consider almost anything that you hear from the public or your own thoughts. It's really, we're trying to figure out whether or not the rezoning is essentially a good idea. So you're pretty much, the universe of things you can consider is pretty wide open. That's not the case in subdivision. In subdivision review, we're just asking whether or not the plat submitted to you meets the requirements of the subdivision ordinance, and what's required for the preliminary plat stage is somewhat minimum. And I'm just pointing out at the bottom of that chart on subdivisions that a lot of things that neighbors and concerned property owners bring before you are often concerns that are not addressed by the subdivision ordinance. So therefore you can't consider them when making your decision. So that's kind of in a nutshell, my summary of the presentation I gave you in May. Won't belabor that anymore unless there's any questions. But I would like to just highlight page 19 in your agenda is a chart on conflicts of interest provisions. And this is somewhat new. You've heard a lot about Chapter 160D, which was a general statute that required Pitt County and other local governments to make a lot of updates to our zoning ordinance, our subdivision ordinance, and other land use ordinances. And for the most part, 160D was just kind of a clarification, a modernization of existing law. But there was at least one thing that was new to it, and I wanted to really bring it to your attention, and that is conflict of interest provisions. There's 3 of them. Financial conflict of interest was in existing law and is not really anything new. Don't want to talk too much about it, and it's pretty clear. And it's if you as a planning board member have a direct, substantial, and readily identifiable financial impact on a decision, you can't participate in it. Secondly, there's a family conflict of interest, and that's new. That was added under 160D, and the folks at the General Assembly were kind enough to define that for us. They tell you what a family conflict of interest is, and it's really just, they lay it out. It's a spouse, a parent, a child, a brother, a sister, a grandparent, or a grandchild, and that includes those relationships that are step, half, or in-law relationships. So that's pretty clear to me. And these apply to the property owner and also the applicant of anything that comes before you. And I just want to point that out because oftentimes the property owner and the applicant are different entities or different individuals. It's not always the property owner who's the applicant. Applicant's oftentimes someone who has a lease or an option to purchase or is in some other relationship with the property owner. The thing I wanted to mention to you tonight is this third conflict of interest, which is a business or other associational relationship. And that one is undefined in the statutes, which I have some questions about it. And essentially, there's a whole host of potential relationships that may or may not trigger this provision. And I can't really I can't give you a bright line, black and white rule, unfortunately. And for that reason, I really want to bring it to your attention. Anytime y'all have any questions about whether or not you have one of these any of these potential conflicts of interest, feel free to reach out to me, preferably prior to the meeting. But if it comes up at the meeting, we can talk about it then. But I really just wanted to make you aware of, especially this third one, because it possibly is quite broad. And I have a list of examples of relationships that may possibly trigger this. It's all going to depend on the circumstances. So like I said, I can't give you a black and white rule, but I wanted to bring it to your attention. Happy to answer any questions about it, or try to answer any questions you may have about it. I can't guarantee you I have a perfect answer for you. And I'm happy to talk about it offline some other point. Any questions from any of the members?
Could you give us just one or two of those examples?
Yeah, so this one has been offered, and I think this is a good illustration. And there's going to be, so let me just give you the example. Let's say that you go to a church, and let's say that your church is very small. Let's say it has 10 or 15 members, and you only have one service, and you're a devoted member, and you go almost weekly. And say another member of that same church is a property owner, small church, 15 members, y'all both are devoted members and go quite often. I would say that's probably going to be an other associational relationship. Let's make that on the other extreme. Let's say you go to a church that's got 500 members and they have 3 different services on Sundays, and you go to the 11 o'clock service sometimes, and you go to the noon service some other times, and the property owner also goes to this large church, and you've maybe met him or her and said hello to them, but you don't know them that well. I would say that's probably not going to be a conflict of interest under this. Now, obviously, I kind of give you, both ends of the spectrum. There's a lot of room in the middle that I couldn't really give you a definitive answer on. Other things are, I put neighbors, and that depends on your relationship. Are you next door neighbors? Some next door neighbors are very close. Some next door neighbors maybe don't talk to each other at all. It's possible that your next door neighbor, it may not be a conflict of interest. I would say your next door neighbor most likely is going to be, because I assume most people have some type of relationship with their next door neighbor, but it all kind of, there's a lot of gray room in this. And I also business relationships and co-workers. It's going to depend on how closely you work with that person. Is it a recurring relationship that's ongoing and you expect to go into the future, or did you have some type of involvement with that person 5 years ago? That wouldn't be, I don't think. So I think the best way for me to kind of illustrate it is with these kind of polar extremes about this probably isn't going to be, this might be, and just know that I realize there's a lot of examples that are going to be in the middle there. And I can't tell you anything other than we just have to talk about the specifics of each case. I hope that's somewhat helpful.
So let me ask this, boss. If I noticed in the family conflict of interest, does that mean if there's a cousin or a nephew or a niece, I'm okay, right?
That is correct. They were kind enough to spell out the family, and nephew or niece and cousin aren't included in the list.
Got it. Okay. But yet, if I go to church with them, I'm in trouble with them.
That's right.
Depending on how well you know them, and I understand that this seems like a difficult, perhaps, question for y'all to wrestle with. I know that a lot of y'all members are active in the community and members of different groups. I suspect at some point the General Assembly is going to hopefully give us some type of clarification. If not, it's going to come through the courts in some form or fashion at some point, but I can't tell you when that may be. So any other questions?
Jordan, you suggested that if we had a idea of whether or not we had one of these conflicts, that we just needed to touch base with you, perhaps when we get our agenda packet prior to the meeting, to discuss that with you.
I mean, that's going to be the best. I mean, if whenever you get your agenda packet, if you could, take a look at it, look at the property owner and the applicant, and think about whether or not. Feel free to give me a call. I'm at 902-3100. But yes, Mr. Chairman, that would be certainly something I'd be happy to talk about.
Other question that I had was, if you did have a conflict, are you recusing yourself from the discussion as well as voting, or just voting on a particular matter?
My recommendation is, if you think you have a conflict, to recuse yourself from both. It's not, I mean, I think actually the statute says cannot vote or participate.
Okay.
And if the statute doesn't say that, my recommendation is, if you think you can't vote, certainly my recommendation would also be to not participate. I think the statute says that, but even if it doesn't, that would be my recommendation to any member.
Understood. Are there any other questions for Mr. Smith from the board? All right. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Hemby. I'm going to ask you a quick question. Was that what you had in mind in terms of the decision tree?
Yes, sir. Just right on point. I tell you, I think he already had it in his briefcase. He just didn't pull it out that night. But he did a phenomenal job. This is right on point. That's what I was asking for. Now we're clear. It's in black and white. We can see it, and we can also follow up with him. We need further. Yeah. Thank you so much for that. Doing that for me. Thank you.
All right. So I think we have Jason Bryant as our next administrative matter with adjacent property notifications.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
So for the adjacent property owner notification concerning proposed subdivision activity, the current policy, when located within 500 foot of the parcel that's being subdivided, we are currently notifying 10 working days prior to that planning board meeting. So at this time, the memo that was included in your package was to request that the board take a look at this current policy and decide if it should be modified, continue with the current policy, or discontinue the notification. The adjacent property owner notification that was sent out, you can see, is on the right-hand side of the screen. And so with that, Mr. Chair, I'll let y'all make the decision.
Thank you. Did the board were you all able to review the memo sample that Jason put in our packets?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Were there any questions or concerns, or do we want to continue the same policy, or do we want to amend how we're doing this? Is there any strong feelings or questions?
I do have a question. It's related to this. I understand that the Board of Commissioners had authorized public comment on subdivision plats being brought before our board. And it gives an impression that we really have a say-so in the subdivision differences that are outlined quite clearly by Mr. Smith that we cannot. So it gives an appearance that we can do that by allowing public comments during our meeting. And I think this is maybe related to adjacent property owner notices. That I understand the need for the adjacent property owners to get plenty of time to address the issues that they may see. But then when they come before our board, then it gives the impression that we can help them out.
So are you thinking that we could address that in this notice to the adjacent property owners by just perhaps removing the public comment?
Yes. But I think that has to go to the county commissioners to get that approval, but maybe we can start the ball rolling. I'm not sure about that. Mr. Smith maybe can.
Yeah, Mr. Smith or Mr. Rhodes could probably address in terms of this policy, because I do believe it's just a policy that had been set by the planning board, but I may be mistaken.
Mr. Chair, I'll be glad to speak to that. This is James. Yes, that is simply a policy that the planning board put in place about 12 to 13 years ago. And again, it came out of a case where adjacent property owners were just surprised that a new development was going in. And so it was kind of a proactive approach to just simply notifying people. Well, as we've seen in more recent situations, it's not just the notification process. People also want to come in, provide guidance or provide comments about a proposed development. And as you're well aware, after Jordan's training and some of our staff's discussions, when you've got a subdivision ordinance that gives those specifications, you're not able to alter those. And again, if the development meets those requirements, but statutorily, the development plan should be approved. So that's the quandary, Mr. Austin, we're in, is simply, do we notify folks at all? And then those people might be somewhat surprised when the street starts being developed, or do we simply, in this case, notify folks like we currently are, but then people come to your meeting and expect some type of action or some type of change to the plan. So this is the quandary we're in. I think our assistant county attorney has some guidance, certainly after he's provided the training over the last couple of months. And Jordan, would you like to speak to that?
Sure, James. I guess what I would say as a first matter, since my role is primarily to give you legal advice, it's clear that we do not have to provide any type of notice to adjacent property owners. It's not required under state law, and it's not required under our ordinance. And so it all, as James said, it all started, and I believe it was 2008. Planning board decided to adopt it as a policy. So one, it's not required. Two, this board could do away with or amend that practice or policy in any way it sees fit. It wouldn't have to go to the Board of Commissioners. As far as the quandary you're in, I don't have an absolute recommendation to you. I have some observations to make and share with you. And that is, one, I understand the idea that adjacent and nearby property owners, there may be value in giving them notice of proposed subdivisions in their vicinity. That could be a good thing. The flip side to that is they come to you with an expectation or voicing concerns. In my 7 years here, 99% of the time, voicing things that you're unable to address. So it kind of puts y'all in a difficult situation. I have no problems with you maintaining the status quo so long as you know your limitations, and I'm happy to get up and remind you of those. But would doing away with the notice eliminate that problem? Probably. Does it create an issue that where the board is not being forthright or hiding the ball? Those are kind of separate considerations that I can't really address, but that's kind of my observation of the whole issue. I don't know if you have any follow-up questions.
I have a question.
Yes, sir. Tucker Moore.
Thank you, Chairman. If we discontinue the notification, will they still get a notification for public comment through the Board of Commissioners?
No, subdivision approvals don't go to the Board of Commissioners, so no.
Okay, so we're just talking about subdivision approvals. Okay.
Yeah, we're just talking about subdivision approval, and I'll say, just to once again kind of contrast it to zoning. Under zoning, we're required under state law to provide notice, and that's notice before it goes to the planning board and notice before it goes to the commissioners. So that's a requirement under zoning that we're not talking about here. We're talking about just subdivision. So
gotcha.
Mr. Hemby?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I my tenure here on the board, also on previous boards in the city and in the county. When you have it open, when your neighbors or adjacent property owners are notified, it gives you transparency. Folks really feel like that you're being above board and you're fair, and that they have time for input. And as the attorney alluded, is that at that time he can state. That's why I asked you for the printout for this breakdown and breakout. So therefore, we will not be under any false illusions that we can do it or not do. We will understand that because we have our laws in front of us. I still think that transparency, from my time being here, I found that it makes it better because you oftentimes put people in a different place. And I think that if you give that consideration, as opposed to saying, well, there's no need you come, you don't need to be notified, blah, blah, blah. It's like cut and dry. I have no input to it. You feel like it's unfair. Then you get that kind of conversation, and see, then I got to get 5 to 10 phone calls fussing at me about hiding something. See, I don't want to get that weight on my shoulder. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hemby. I can certainly understand that perspective as well. And in terms of, is there any other comments or questions?
Is there a motion on the lower end?
There's not.
Okay, and
We're just.
I just heard Mr. Hemby too, and I tend to agree rather than trying to let folks think that we're trying to do something and not let them be aware, because I'd kind of like to know if you're about to put a subdivision down here beside my little house in Belleville. I'd like to at least know about it and think that I had some input, even though I realize that this board may not be able to change any of the outcome, but at least that property owner has had a chance to voice their opinion. So there again, in saying that, if I may, could I render a motion?
You certainly may. If you would, Mr. Austin has his hand up to speak. We can certainly make a motion and second and then have a discussion about it. If you want.
I'll yield to Mr. Austin. Go ahead.
Okay, Mr. Austin.
And I yield to Mr. Little because I was going to propose a motion.
All right. Well, either one of you that would like to make the motion, please do so.
Well, I move that we continue with the current policy.
All right. So we'll have anybody second Mr. Little's stick with the current policy motion.
I second the motion, R.J. Henry.
All right, Mr. Hemby, and is there any discussion on Mr. Little's motion?
I'd like to talk about, in continuing the policy, that we clearly state in our notification that we're not required by state law to provide this notification, but in good faith that we would prefer to notify you of a proposed subdivision. You may comment as part of a public record, but that the planning board has no ability to deny the subdivision based on your comments.
Would that not be a motion to modify?
Yeah, he's saying he's changing the motion.
I think we're just discussing the motion at this point.
That's right.
I don't think Mr. Austin made a amendment to the motion, the current motion.
Okay.
He was just offering his thoughts on it. Is there any other? Did you express yourself, Mr. Austin?
Yes, that's exactly what I wanted to express and wanted.
Let's find out if there's any other discussion or questions about what you've shared, or if anybody else would like to share anything further.
Whether it's an amendment or if I could say, I'd be happy to include that piece in the original motion.
Okay. Is there any, Mr. Landron, do you have any comments, or Mr. Hemby?
No, like Mr. Austin said, I think some type of even if it's just a single line that clarifies that, an amendment that clarifies that, I think might make things a little better.
Okay, so we have Mr. Little's motion and his agreement to go with a amendment along the lines of what Mr. Austin has expressed, of making it clear that oftentimes the planning board can't make decisions other than what they're guided by or led by through the administrative ordinance. Did I articulate that correctly, Mr. Austin?
I think that's good. I think that's good.
Yeah, I think so. Just make it clear that we're acting in good faith too, that this is not a state requirement.
And then hopefully one of our staff folks can massage the notification letter, and perhaps at the next meeting we can review that again. Perfect. And then approve that. But are there any other thoughts? The only thing that I would like to share is going back to what original Mr. Austin said, was that if there was a way that we could certainly give everybody the notice, but then not express or ask specifically for comments at the public hearing, would also be a way to address that. But I won't change the motion at all since we have that in place. So unless there's any other comments, let's vote on this amended motion, please.
You amended excuse me, for clarification, you doing a vote on the motion, or you amending the motion to the motion?
I think the motion has been amended, has it not?
I think Mr. Hemby might need, if he offered the second on the original motion, and since it's been altered, I think it'd be appropriate to see if he's willing to now second the changed motion.
Agreed.
All right. So Mr. Little has agreed to the amendment to his motion that Mr. Austin has made, and Mr. Hemby, are you in agreement with the second?
Yeah, I'll for the sake of argument, I'll agree with Mr. Little motion.
All right, perfect. So, and Ms. Otten, if you would call the roll, please.
Fred Austin,
I approve the amendment.
Dave Barefoot,
Approve.
Naomi Buck, Brad Good,
Approve.
RJ Hemby,
Approve.
John Landron,
Approved.
Steve Little, Tucker Moore.
I vote no.
And just so that I'm clear, does the staff understand the motion that was made?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
If Tab's got it recorded, I think I took some notes as well. Just so you know, we do have a proposed subdivision going out that you'll actually consider at your July meeting. So we'll go ahead and draft the next notification based on your comments tonight, but we'll also include that in your package for July so you can have an opportunity to look at it and if anything needs to change. Mr. Chairman, I do have one question for our Assistant County Attorney. I know he's had some concerns about this policy not being reflected in our subdivision ordinance. Jordan, would you like to speak to that and maybe give some advice along that line since we are retaining the notification process?
Yeah, so when James and I first discussed this, I don't know how many months ago, I had questions about when it started, and we did the research, or James and staff did, and saw that it happened in 2008 via planning board motion and action. And I would tell you that if the board's inclined to keep it, I would prefer that it be done, and this can be at a later meeting, that it be enshrined in the subdivision ordinance, which would mean the planning board would make a recommendation to add it to the subdivision ordinance, and then it would be taken up to the commissioners for consideration. And that's for a couple of, I mean, I think that if we're going to do it as a practice, I just think it'd be best done to be enshrined in the subdivision ordinance, because the subdivision ordinance and state law really kind of govern what you do with subdivisions. And so I think just the better practice is, if we're going to have it, is to have it in the subdivision ordinance. So
we could have that on our agenda for the July meeting.
Thank you very much.
Yes, we'll be glad to include that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And I believe we have I think that's the last administrative item matter. Did you want to talk about the July meeting format, James, here, or would you like to do that in your presentation? I guess you're next anyway, so.
Well, I think Jason still got it up, so we're just going to let him continue with that.
Thank you, Jason.
Well, actually, I was just talking from the screen. Can you see the screen now?
Yes.
Is that being shared? Okay. And Commissioner Colson's on the line tonight, and would just like to acknowledge that again. He's our board liaison, but just to bring you up to date as to what the Board of Commissioners have been considering just recently at their June 7th meeting, they did rescind our face masking policy. And in turn, they're also looking at going to in-person meetings starting in July. Now, at the same time, they didn't make a firm requirement for boards and commissions of the county to do the same. So tonight, I just wanted to at least broach this subject with the board, give you a month to consider what some of your options are. And at the July meeting, Mr. Chair, I'm recommending that we have that on the agenda to consider 3 different options. We can resume our meetings. And again, after the July meeting, which would be our August meeting, resume our arrangements in the board auditorium like we did prior to the pandemic. We could also ensure, if we needed to meet in another location to social distance, we could also make those accommodations. Or finally, we could just stay in the virtual mode of handling our meetings until the board felt comfortable to come back as a full group. Mr. Chair, I would like to say, even if there's one member that wants to stay in a remote format and everyone else was to come into a meeting place, that would still mean our meetings would have to be conducted in a virtual format as well, as far as roll call votes like we're doing tonight and some of those other things, especially in the advertisement of the meetings as well. So those are 3 of your primary options going forward. And if someone can move toward the next slide. So what I'm proposing tonight, Mr. Chair and members of the board, is to meet virtually on your July 21st meeting. We already know we have a couple of items coming back to you, and vote at that time as to how and when to resume in-person meetings, because we really see with some of the activities you're involved with, looking at plans, having public comment, it really lends itself better to being in person. And we know, just as an example, for our Board of Adjustment, that requires in-person meetings, and we know we're having an in-person meeting with them in July. But for the Planning Board, right now, Mr. Chair, here's our recommendation: next meeting virtual, and then also allowing you to vote as to where you'd like to go from there. Welcome any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Rhodes. Yes, I was just going to ask if we could just get some feedback or any questions about returning to in-person meetings or virtually from the board at this point.
RJ Hemby.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair, I was just looking at my memo here. The governor said that he's going to keep in place pretty much what he have in place at this time until July the 30th. So I would love to see what the governor would say after July 30th. If he's going to release more, put it up more, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it would be premature for us to vote in July, and the governor still have us until July the 30th. And then he's going to make a second move. So it'd be up to the board. I would just think it into consideration that he, has us this month. He said he's going to extend it to July the 30th.
Okay, thank you for that feedback, Mr. Hemby. So that would essentially mean that at our next meeting, we would not know the government or the governor's plan, since we would be meeting on the 21st, and he would be making that announcement on the 30th. But we could certainly talk about that again at the July meeting. Are there any other thoughts?
I would be in favor of going back to in-person.
Okay, thank you. Any other?
I'm ready either way, and I'll try to be in attendance either way. So.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, so we'll discuss that more at the July meeting.
And Mr. Chairman, just to be clear, I think I got some consent here or consensus that we will be moving forward with just the July meeting in a virtual format. Just wanted to ensure everyone was comfortable with that. We'll need to advertise accordingly.
Yes, I think everybody's in agreement that we would meet virtually on the 21st.
Very good.
Put in your slide.
Thank you. And then if someone will progress on to the final slide for tonight's meeting, just a few things in your agenda package, Mr. Chair, members, your monthly report from planning staff, a couple of articles in there, and certainly welcome any of your comments and questions. And please refer people. We do it quite often. A lot of good resource material on our website, our webpage for the planning department, our plans, our ordinances, and so forth. So that's the actual site listed at the bottom of the screen right now. And Mr. Chair, that's all we have for tonight, and look forward to seeing you back in July.
All right, thank you very much. And again, thank everybody for coming. I apologize for my inarticulate restatement of Mr. Austin's amendment to the motion, but I think we've all got it down, and we'll see everybody in July unless there's any other comments that anybody has. All right. Thank you very much. We'll see you in July.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye now.